Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to all of you ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to the Smart Incentive Series number 2. So the title today is Tax Incentives Unlock the Opportunities. So this topic is quite a favorite topic, especially among the small and medium enterprises. And here we have Mr. Dinesh Khanna, our speaker for today. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Ida Yassin. I'm from Putra Business School. So today, 8 October of 2020 at 10 a.m. until 11 a.m., we are going to have a presentation by Mr. Dinesh. But before I introduce Mr. Dinesh to you, I would like to thank the organizer, which is Malaysia Productivity Corporation, or MPC. For your information, MPC is an agency under the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. So for opening remark, I would like to invite Madam Zulaifa Omar, the Director of Productivity and Competitiveness Development Department. Over to you, Madam Zulaifa.
Okey, terima kasih Dr. Ida. Okay, Assalamualaikum, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera. Saya ucapkan kepada Encik Dinesh Khanna daripada partner TraTax sebagai penceramah kita pada sesi ini, dan juga Dr. Ida Yassin daripada Universiti Putra Malaysia UPM acara, dan yang paling penting adalah para peserta webinar sekalian. Ya, pertama kali saya kepada tuan-puan yang dapat dalam sesi webinar on Smart Incentive siri kedua yang cukup menarik, unlock the opportunity. So jadi kita jangan ketinggalan opportunity itu pada hari ini. Okey. Jadi tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, ya, sebagaimana yang kita semua maklum dan rasai, organisasi serata dunia pada masa ini sedang terkesan daripada pandemik COVID-19, dan di mana negara kita Malaysia kecuali. Pandemik yang di luar jangkaan ini telah menyebabkan perubahan yang drastik dalam ekosistem sektor Tuhan permintaan atau permintaan dari pelanggan, notifikasi, gangguan rantai bekalan serta pengangguran. Ya, sebahagian besar SME di negara kita ini juga terjejas dari segi operasi, aliran wang tunai, pemberhentian pekerja dan juga kapasiti untuk mengembangkan perniagaan pada masa akan datang. Ya, dalam suasana yang tidak menentu, enterprise perlu mengukuhkan keupayaan pengurusan bagi menentukan dan memastikan perniagaan dapat bertahan. Bersama kesulitan ada kemudahan, jangan kita lupa yang itu. Akan ada pelajaran, ya. Dalam satu rencana yang diterbaikkan oleh Bank Dunia, kenyataannya menjangkakan bahawa kita Malaysia akan dengan baik kerana ianya berpaksikan kepada kita punya makro fundamental yang teguh. GDP negara dijangka menyusut sebanyak 3.1% berdasarkan kepada data suku kedua. Namun kerajaan dan juga komitmen dari pihak swasta, kita mempunyai harapan ekonomi negara akan dapat kembali berkembang. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, keupayaan untuk ekonomi negara ataupun GDP kita berkembang adalah bergantung kepada kebolehan dan keupayaan enterprise untuk maju dan berdaya saing. Kunci sesebuah boleh bertahan dan berdaya saing, productivity. Ya. Namun walaupun kita tak activity itu, tapi itu adalah merupakan seperti udara yang kita kita tak nampak. Tanpa udara kita tidak boleh hidup, ataupun dengan kita punya nyawa sendiri, ya. Tanpa nyawa tak nampak, tapi tanpa nyawa kita tidak akan berada di mana sekarang, ya. Jadi bagaimana enterprise dapat memaksimumkan efisiensi dan effectiveness through creating higher value products to customer, itulah yang menjadi dia punya tonggak. Jadi penghayatan makna productivity ini perlu ditanamkan kepada setiap DNA setiap pekerja dalam enterprise supaya ia menjadi satu amalan budaya kerja. Namun kita dapati bahawa pertumbuhan produktiviti di semua sektor berkembang dengan kadar yang perlahan. Satu di antara yang telah dikenal pasti dalam Malaysia Productivity Blueprint, yang boleh menjejaskan pertumbuhan ekonomi adalah berkaitan insentif kita. Kita sedia maklum bahawa insentif dan bantuan-bantuan kerajaan amat diperlukan ekonomi negara. Walaupun banyak insentif-insentif yang kepada enterprise bagi meningkatkan perniagaan, namun sebahagian daripada insentif ini tidak disasarkan untuk berfungsi sebagai landasan bagi melonjakkan produktiviti. Jadi ini memerlukan pertukaran minda di mana kita perlu mengubah minda kita bagi masa sekarang dan akan datang, bahawa insentif dan bantuan keuangan perlu berkait dengan peningkatan produktiviti untuk meningkatkan kecekapan dan pencapaian. Daripada aktiviti pengumpulan maklumat yang dijalankan, terdapat lebih 200 insentif yang ada sekarang ini di peringkat kementerian dan agensi dalam pelbagai bentuk seperti tax insentif, grant, matching grant, soft loan, penjana dan lain-lain lagi. Jadi anda sekalian perlu berada sampai ke akhir pada rancangan ini untuk bersama mendengar penerangan terperinci yang akan dikongsi oleh Encik Dinesh dalam pembentangan beliau sebentar lagi. Sabar ya, sekejap lagi. MPC melalui Smart Incentive Unit sedang dalam peringkat awal dalam membangunkan rangka kerja pengurusan insentif atau Incentive Management Framework sebagai panduan untuk insentif pegawai pelaksana di peringkat kementerian, agensi dan dalam pengurusan rantai bagi merealisasi outcome yang ditetapkan di mana akhirnya negara akan dapat impact yang positif. Ini yang penting sebab what the government give in terms of incentive, it should be managed effectively so that dia boleh mendapatkan ROI kembali kepada negara, so it will be used by the economy. Ya, kami di NPC berharap ini akan dapat membantu agensi-agensi terlibat dan setiap insentif yang telah ditetapkan dengan pakai atau merujuk pada panduan kerja yang akan dibangunkan. Sudah tentu NPC tidak boleh bekerja secara sendirian. NPC tidak boleh work in silo. Jadi kami memerlukan rakan-rakan strategi inisiatif ini. Dan kami percaya wakil-wakil dari agensi-agensi dan kementerian yang ada bersama kita pada hari ini sudi untuk menyambut salam kerjasama dari NPC. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, sekali lagi saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada penceramah Encik Dinesh, kepada pengurusacara Dr. Ida dan juga kepada anda sekalian peserta atas kehadiran anda dalam sisi webinar siri kedua ini. Semoga anda semua akan mendapat manfaat berkaitan insentif-insentif yang ada dan bagaimana untuk menjadikan insentif-insentif ini sebagai pemangkin kepada peningkatan produktiviti dan ekonomi negara, supaya ianya boleh menjadikan kehidupan kita di negara kita di Malaysia ini sejahtera lagi. Ya, sebagai peringatan bersama juga dengan situasi semasa wabak COVID-19 hari ini, sama mematuhi SOP yang ditetapkan. Stay safe, stay healthy and stay productive. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya kembalikan kepada Dr. Ida, acara kita pada hari sesi seterusnya. Silakan doktor.
Terima kasih Puan Zulaifah atas penerangan. I think a very important point for us that there are about more than 200 incentive that been given by the government, including tax incentives. So that's a topic that we are going to have today. Yeah. So before I read the profile of our speaker, Mr. Dinesh, to all the attendees, if you have any questions, you can always raise your hand. Or of course, you raise your hand using the icon hand in front of you in the this platform, yeah, so that we can know, then we can unmute you. Another method that you can do is to write your question at the chat box. There is a chat box there, you can see, so the organizer can see that, and perhaps I'll pick some of the questions for our speaker, Mr. Dinesh. Okay, let me introduce Mr. Dinesh to you. He is a partner. Mr. Dinesh Khanna is a partner at TraTax, a firm of independent tax advisors rated as a top 10 in Malaysia, yeah, in terms of tax transaction. He is also a fellow member of ACCA, Association of Chartered Certified Accountants, a member of MIA, Malaysian Institute of Accountants, CTIM, the Chartered Tax Institute of Malaysia, and for the International Fiscal Association. So he is licensed by the Ministry of Finance as a tax agent. Mr. Dinesh has been a presenter for various forums before this and co-authored a few books in his area of interest. So if you are interested to look for Mr. Dinesh's book, perhaps you can Google. There are 4, if I'm not mistaken, here. So we are fortunate to have Mr. Dinesh this morning for our sharing session. And without further ado, I would like to call upon Mr. Dinesh. So the floor is yours, Mr. Dinesh.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, MPC, for organizing this this awareness talk. Okay, give me a second.
You may wanna click the slideshow. Now we can't see the slide, but just now I can see the slide, Mr. Dinesh.
Okay, should be able to see better now.
Okay, yes,
okay.
That's perfect.
So good morning, everyone, and thanks MPC and Dr. Ida for organizing and introducing respectively. So today we are here for tax incentive for business, unlock the opportunities. I think during this time we had a few areas that we could have focused on. There are a lot of initiatives from the government to help the businesses and rakyat to survive and to relieve and whatnot. That might have been covered in other webinars and so on. Today, what we are focusing on is how to, as they say, every crisis is an opportunity. So what are the opportunities that we have to make our enterprises more productive and to help our enterprises to grow, to help our businesses to grow? There's definitely, of course, every crisis is a challenge, but every crisis is also an opportunity for businesses to show their leadership and to grow, right? So today we are focusing on the opportunity part of this of the current situation. And for that, what we will do is we'll have an introduction first, because we need to understand the concept of incentive and what's generally incentive first. Then we will talk about tax incentive for various sectors. We have quite a number of sectors here. So obviously in the limited time given, we can't cover every single sector in detail. I will highlight the concept for the key sectors and allow the others to be taken as reading material, but happy to take questions in the Q&A session to explain further. That is a more pragmatic approach to manage the time more productively. And then I'll also touch on the new incentives in the 2020 budget update, which was, 2020 budget update is actually announced in October 2019, which is before the pandemic. Then during the year 2020, we had all the stimulus packages, Prihatin and Penjana and whatnot, that had a lot of incentives in there, such as wage subsidy program and various grants and whatnot. But what I will be doing today is to focus only on the tax incentives. So we won't touch topics such as wage subsidy program and whatnot, because those are very valid, very important incentives, but those are not tax incentives per se. We'll focus the next hour on tax incentives. Okay, I like to start the session with this pantun. Berat sama dipukul, ringan sama dijinjing. Why am I using this pantun, right? Because this is the underlying concept of incentives, if I may say. The idea of incentives is to incentivize businesses to do certain things. For example, to make an investment in Malaysia, so that the business benefits out of the incentive, but the incentive also induces dia lagi encourage the business to do something, which will in turn benefit the economy, both in terms of employment as well as local purchases, which will benefit the local SMEs. So it is the concept of collective good for the economy. So the concept of tax incentive is basically whereby the government incentivizes certain industries, certain businesses to do certain things in order to benefit the economy and hence the government and people and everyone. So during ordinary times, it might be ringan sama dijinjing, but during COVID time, pandemic time, it's also berat sama dipukul, whereby we recognize that there are issues, but at the same time, we encourage businesses to look at opportunities to invest or to automate and whatnot, so that there is collective good. And there's sometimes a negative tag attached to automate. So when we automate or when we improve productivity, sometimes people say, oh, that means less people are needed, therefore it's not good for employment. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. The concept is we are all in this technology era, we are all going for more high-tech jobs, more skillful jobs. So the idea is always to make the enterprise more productive and retrain the workforce to be more productive, so that the enterprise becomes more productive. They can add more value to the shareholders and to the economy. And the same applies to the economy as a whole. Okay, there are various diverse tax incentives in Malaysia. In fact, sometimes we say this, the 200 is the basic type, but within the 200 there are so many sub variations. It's almost like you name it, we have it. That kind of a wide menu card of incentives we have in Malaysia. We have this so-called promoted activity and promoted product, which is a list that's maintained by MIDA, for which generally we give pioneer status and investment tax allowance. These are two very key incentives in Malaysia. Pioneer status means that your income, pendapatan, is exempt for 5 or 10 years. Again, the rate of exemption can be totally exempt, can be 70% exempt, depending on the product or product or activity that we're talking about. So pioneer status is to exempt income. Remember that we exempt your income during 5-year, 10-year period. Investment tax allowance is where we give an allowance that is based on the capex incurred. So we always say pioneer status is income based. Investment tax allowance is expense or investment based. The irony, if I may say, is that even though investment tax allowance, we say the period is 5 or 10 years, actually sebenarnya it is timeless. Why we say sebenarnya is timeless? Because imagine you make an investment and you obtain the allowance and you can't offset against the income in the first year. You can carry forward that forever until it's fully utilized. And this can be carried forward even beyond the 5-year, 10-year incentive period. So this is what a lot of businesses do as well. They make investments and they generate the allowance, and as a result of that, they pay reduced tax for much longer than 5 or 10 years. So that is something that we need to keep in mind when we evaluate pioneer status versus investment tax allowance. Of course, these are mutually exclusive. You can go only for one. I always say pioneer status is 5 or 10 years only, but investment tax allowance, even though we say 5 or 10 years, actually you might be able to carry forward and utilize it much longer than 5 or 10 years. That's why government gives this opportunity, this option to businesses to choose whether they want to go for pioneer status or ITA. You can do the calculations and to see which one turn out better. You can see here, we say pioneer status or the like, investment tax allowance or the like. Why we say or the like is because these days a lot of incentives are also customized. So I say we have a very long menu list for incentive, but even if your case is not in that so-called menu list, you can always, depending on the size of the investment and depending on the industry you're investing in, of course, you can always come up to the relevant agency and say that, hey, I want to make this investment, this product, and I think this is very important for the economy, this is very important for the country, and can we come up with a pre-packaged or customized incentive? We have avenue for that as well. Okay, to go sector by sector, I will first start with manufacturing sector. So manufacturing sector, as we say generally, kita dapat secara umum is 70% of income or 60% of expense, right? Pioneer status is 70% of income, investment tax allowance is 60% of expense. But for certain category, you can get enhanced. For example, if the activity fall under national strategic importance, instead of 70%, we can go for 100%. Similarly, ITA, instead of getting 60% of the CapEx, capital expenditure, we can get 100% of the capital expenditure. So contohnya if we buy machineries, so when you buy machineries, we already can get capital allowance or tax depreciation over a 5-year period or 4-year period, depending on the type of machine. On top of that, you can get this incentive, ITA, which is subject to approval, application and approval. Usually it's 60%, which means you spend 1 million, you can get tax deduction for 1.6 million. But under the enhanced category, national strategic importance, the incentive can increase from 60 to 100%, which mean you spend 1 million, you can effectively get tax deduction for 2 million, because 1 million you will get by way of capital allowance or tax depreciation over a number of years, and another 100%, which is 1 million, you will get as the immediate investment tax allowance to be offset against your income. So if your income that year is not enough, you can carry forward to future years to offset. So bayangkan, our tax rate is 24%. Our tax rate is 24%. I like to say almost a quarter lah, almost a quarter. So when we spend something, when we buy machinery for contohnya 1 million, sebenarnya 240,000 we already get by way of tax saving, because the 1 million will be given as capital allowance or tax deduction for a number of years, and that will give a tax saving of 240,000 already. Then comes this kind of incentive. If you get an incentive ITA 100%, you get another 1 million as additional incentive deduction, and that result in another 240,000 tax saving. So total over time, you spend 1 million, you save in tax is 480,000, almost half of the expense already. Okay, so high-tech projects, similarly, we have increased rates. Selected M&E machinery and equipment, we can also get higher rates. Actually, the list is longer. There are also automotive sector and everything, but if we want to cover everything, definitely we can't do that in an hour. Okay, reinvestment allowance. This is another type of tax incentive. I know by now we already have 3 terminologies. That's the thing with tax, a lot of terminologies. But what I need you to remember is, just now tadi kita cakap pioneer status and investment tax allowance. Pioneer status and investment tax allowance, we must have approval. We must apply, we must get the approval, only then we can claim. Reinvestment allowance is special. Why reinvestment allowance is special? Because no need to apply, you can straight away claim. You need to self-assess whether you fulfill the condition, and if you fulfill the condition, you can claim directly in the tax return. No need to write in or get approval and all those things lah. So that is why reinvestment allowance is very famous, if I may say. But reinvestment allowance is available only for manufacturing sector. It's available only for manufacturing sector. You need to this is basically for any machine equipment that we spend on for the purpose of expansion, modernization, automation, or diversification of an existing manufacturing business. So existing because we must be operation for at least 3 tahun, and then we incur costs on factory, plant, and machinery to expand, modernize, automate, or diversify. So all this goes back to productivity, because when we modernize, when we automate, that definitely helps productivity. When we diversify, it gives us, if it's upstream or downstream diversification, it gives us a better control over the supply chain, and that also helps in terms of productivity. Expansion, and this is something that people sometimes overlook. When you expand a business, you have economies of scale, And economies of scale does help a lot with productivity as well. So these, I would call them as productivity linked measures. Some are more directly linked, some are less directly linked, but nevertheless, they all have a positive effect on productivity. This is incentivized by way of a reinvestment allowance. But one catch here, very important, is you must make sure you have a qualifying project. This word qualifying project, which means you're not randomly incurring expenditure on machines or equipment to grow. No, you are incurring it as part of a qualifying project. Only then you can eligible for this reinvestment allowance. So when IRB come to audit, of course, this reinvestment allowance you don't need to apply. You don't need to apply. You can claim straight away. But when IRB, LHDN come to audit, one of the things that they want to see is to make sure that there is a qualifying project that relate to all this expansion, modernization, automation, diversification. Kalau there is no qualifying project, you will have a problem to justify your entitlement to the incentive. So that is why you need to have some professionals to vet through and make sure documentation is there to support the project, because sometimes the project is in the mind but it's not black and white. Then there is a problem. You need to put it black and white. Only then when IRB come in, you can easily demonstrate there is a qualifying project. So once you satisfy this,
means that we need to have the evidence, right? I mean, the qualifying project is not in our mind really.
Yes, you must have it black and white. Yeah. For example, you need to have some project paper which is approved in the board meeting, for example. And then when IRB come, you can say these are project, and we incur all these expenses on machines and everything is part of the project. It is not that we feel that we want to grow and we suddenly incur. No, it cannot be random lah. There needs to be a project, there needs to be a plan. Yes, doctor, that is very important. Black and white evidence must be there. Because over years we realized this is one area, because reinvestment allowance, one thing is easy, you don't need to apply, but another thing is when you don't meet the condition, IRB come in, then they add back and come with penalty as well. So that's why documentation is very important there. Okay, what is the benefit of this this allowance? You get 60%, which mean if you spend 1 million ringgit on machineries, ordinarily you can get capital allowance of 1 million. Capital allowance is tax deduction of 1 million over a number of years, and that tax deduction of 1 million means kita boleh jimat cukai, we can save tax 240,000. That is ordinary. Reinvestment allowance, what it gives us an additional 600,000 deduction, and that 600,000 deduction will give about 140 something of tax saving. Right? How do I get 140 something? 600,000 being 60% of 1 million. So we say 1 million is your capex. Contohnya 1 million is your capex. You can claim reinvestment allowance 60%. And when you claim 60%, which is 600,000, that you can save tax, because our tax rate in Malaysia is 24%. So it's about plus minus 140,000 lah, plus minus lah 140,000. Okay. That's for 1 million. So of course, if it's 2 million, then double that amount and whatnot. Another thing with reinvestment allowance is that the period it goes in is for 100 and the period is 15 years. That is another thing. Reinvestment allowance, a company, your first 3 years you cannot claim, right? Your first 3 years you cannot claim. 36 months, first 3 years that you form the company, you start the business, you cannot claim. After that, when you start claiming, you can claim only for maximum 15 years. So that's why if the company is, let's say, ditubuhkan pada year 2000, for example, then you need to calculate, have you reached the 15 years or not, since you first claim. Maybe you start in 2000, but you never claim until 2010. First time you claim reinvestment allowance is 2010. Then 2020, 2021, you masih boleh claim lah. But what if I start the business in 2000, in the year 2003 I started claiming already. So sekarang saya boleh claim ke tak? Sepatutnya tak boleh. Sepatutnya tak boleh sebab dah 15 years dah claim kan. Dia from 15 years from the first year of claim. Okay. Tetapi because of the pandemic situation, under Penjana, the government have given some flexibility whereby for this 2020, for the year 2020-2021, this year's affected by pandemic, even if you expire your 15-year period, you can still claim. So this is another initiative that is covered in the Penjana program to encourage businesses to look at this as an opportunity to grow. The businesses. Now, this is not the first time we have a difficult economic situation. I have had clients whom had grown, for example, in shipping industry, become number one in Malaysia, not number one, but a leading provider in Malaysia, because they used a previous economic downturn as an opportunity to capitalize on cheaper construction materials to construct facilities. I've also had clients in the education industry whom have used the previous economic downturn as an opportunity to grow colleges into university colleges, and then universities and whatnot, taking by providing more education options for Malaysians who cannot go to overseas to pursue their education. So with every crisis, if we look carefully, there is an opportunity. And when there is an opportunity, here comes tax incentive as a support from the government to make it easier to further encourage to seize the opportunity. And that opportunity can be a business growth, can be a productivity matter. Okay, carrying on. So the extension for 2020-2021 you don't see in this slide because there is a Penjana initiative. I've included it separately at the end. Automation capital allowance. So this is another initiative that's been around for quite a while, the last few years, where again for businesses that have been in operation for at least 3 years, if you are spending on automation equipment that is directly used in manufacturing to enhance the productivity, you can get ACA, accelerated capital allowance, as well as additional allowance that has the effect of giving a double deduction, whereby you spend 1 million and you get tax deductions up to 2 million. Of course, the details varies in terms of the limit. For high labor intense industry, it can be spent up to 4 million. For other industries, maximum 2 million is there. And the application's due date has been extended to 2023. Okay, the other thing is export, because Malaysia is also a strong exporter, strong export market because of forex and whatnot. In export, we always focus on value added. Value added is very important. What is the meaning of value added? Value added means you run a factory in Malaysia. If you sell 100 million, the question is, when you sell something or export something for 100 million, how much is the value added that is created in Malaysia? So we minus the bought-in material and services. So this is the value added. Value added doesn't mean profit, because value added comprise of wages to Malaysian workers or wages to workers, as well as a few other things, as well as profit. Because when we run a business, we all focus on how much value do we add. And promotion of export is built around that. So for exporters, because we don't want Malaysia to be a low value manufacturing hub, we want Malaysia to be a high value manufacturing hub. So to encourage more high value added manufacturing activities or exports, we have this incentives, whereby depending on the value add, you can get allowance of 10% of the increase in export sales. There are some calculations that you have to use ex-factory value and whatnot, but senang cakap increase in export sales lah. The concept of it is increase in export sale. Sometimes people tell me, "Wah, Tinesh, only 10% cukup or not?" I always say you need to remember this is not exemption of 10% of profit. This is exemption that is 10% of sale, 10% of sale, which means if your incremental sales is 10 million, maybe your profit margin is, I don't know, 10%. You get a profit of for 10 million of incremental sales, you get an incremental profit of 1 million, and this is a 10% exemption. 10% of the sales, so 10% of sales, 10% of 10 million is 1 million. So effectively, if your profit margin is 10%, we are talking about 100% of your profit being exempted. So need to always remember, this is 10% of increased sales, not 10% of profit. So it's very powerful. It's not 10% of profit, it's 10% of sales. Of course, if your value added is 50 or 40%, then the allowance is increased. The tax benefit is given as 15% of increased sales. Why I say 50 or 40%? Because 50% is a normal rate, but for SME, a reduced rate of 40%. Similarly, 30% is the general rate for 10% incentive, but for SME, we give a reduced rate of 20%. Then regardless of the value added, if there is an increase in the export, at least 50% increase, then you have a 30% exemption on the income. So your expenses are all deductible, and yet we give a 30% on income. So imagine your incremental sales is 10 million. 10 million, you can have a profit of, let's say, 1 million, but here you're getting an exemption of 30% of 10 million, which is 3 million. So the exemption amount can even be higher than the profit amount. So the excess, of course, you can carry forward for future years and whatnot. Okay. There are also for penetrating new market, there's incentive. If you obtain export excellence award from MITI, then there's even higher incentive and whatnot. And most of this incentive are available only for Malaysian-owned companies to encourage Malaysian enterprises. Then, of course, Industry Forward is there, or previously known as Industry 4.0. This is where we talk about investing in artificial intelligence, 3D printing, and a 4.0 initiative. There's a lot of double deduction as well as special incentives available for it. I don't want to go through this one by one, but of course, if there's a question, I'm happy to take these questions later. Moving on to the next, agricultural sector. For agricultural sector, similar to manufacturing, the concept is similar. So that's why the other industries can be faster, because the concept is similar. You can get ITA, which is based on the qualifying capital expenditure, or you can also get pioneer status. Reinvestment allowance. Just now I said reinvestment allowance is available for manufacturing, right? It is also available for certain agriculture, because not all agriculture qualifies. For example, if you are rearing chicken and ducks, that doesn't qualify. If you are doing floral products, if you are growing flowers, that doesn't qualify. But if you are growing fruits or vegetables, that often qualifies. So there's a long list that says what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. But the principle is the same, is still 60% and whatnot. Promotion of export. Okay, so to encourage promotion of export is similar to what we saw for manufacturing. It is also available for agriculture sector. So if you for export of prescribed products, we give 10% of the value of increased export. And there are also others for export excellence and penetrating new markets, similar to manufacturing. Okay, tourism sector. Tourism sector, this has been quite static incentives in Malaysia. The incentives have been around for a long time to promote 3-star hotels, 4-star, 5-star hotels, and so on and so forth. Of course, all of this has conditions that you must have minimum X number of inbound tourists and whatnot. There are also other incentives for tour operators with minimum inbound tourists and so on. But of course, for the forthcoming year 2020-2021, I think this might have to be relooked at as well, because now we are already talking about the concept of virtual tourist, and I'm sure that will be looked at in times to come. Next, another very important sector is R&D sector.
Mr. Dinesh, we have another perhaps around 20 minutes for the presentation. Meanwhile, I would like to ask the attendees, if you have any question, you can always type in the chat box, and the rest who those raise hands, perhaps we can have it towards the end of the session. Yeah. And meanwhile, for those who have questions to Mr. Dinesh, you can type in the chat box. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Dinesh.
Okay. So please enter the questions in the chat box so that we can address those and give you real answers that's more relevant to your own organization. You can still see my screen, right?
Still see your screen. R&D.
Okay, perfect. So R&D is another very important sector. Many developed countries are where they are now because of R&D activities, which put them at the top. And Malaysia is also incentivizes R&D a lot because we see that as a way forward. The definition of R&D has been amended. I would like, it says here 28th of December 2018, but practically we always say beginning of 2019 lah, because it's 2-3 weeks from the end of 2018. So from the beginning of 2019, the definition of R&D has been amended to encourage and induce the real R&D activities. So now the new definition says you must have systematic, investigative, and experimental. It's not all, it's and. You must satisfy all three. Must involve novelty or technical risk, and the object of acquiring new knowledge must be there. And there's also an exclusion list. So things like testing or only cosmetic updates will not be included. So this is where I always say, the definition of R&D for other ministries and tax incentive is different. So just because you call yourself as R&D for internal purposes, for commercial purposes, or licensing purposes, that doesn't mean it is an incentivized R&D. So a lot of things you're doing could be R&D, but the question is whether is it within the definition of R&D for the purpose of incentive or not. That is the question that you must conduct an objective assessment. So major R&D incentives, we have incentive Pioneer Status ITA. So Pioneer Status ITA is for the company that is doing the R&D. But on top of that, there is also incentive for companies that are paying for R&D to be done. So as an example, say company X pays company Y to do R&D. So which means that the R&D activity is done by company Y, but the result of that R&D activity is given to company X because company X is the one that is incurring the expenditure. So what we will do is for company Y that is doing the R&D activity, it can be eligible for either Pioneer Status or ITA, investment tax allowance lah. Whereas for company X that is incurring the expenditure, we will also incentivize, we'll give them a double deduction, which means if they pay $100 to Y, they can get a deduction of $200. And then they get a deduction of $200, they already have a tax savings of $98. Right? Sorry, they already have a tax savings of $48, which means when they pay $100, they already have $48 from tax saving. Only $52 is the actual expense. So that scheme is there. Further, one more thing. For many services in Malaysia now is subject to service tax, 6% service tax. But if company Y has the approved R&D or approved contract R&D status, then the 6% service tax will also not be applicable. It's automatic. Once you obtain the status, service tax exemption is automatic. So that incentive is also there. So I always say R&D, we need to look at it as a package to see how to maximize R&D activities within the group of company as well as outside. And these options are also available for universities nowadays, that universities can also be enrolled onto the scheme, so that even public universities, for example, their income exemption may not, pioneer status ITA may not be relevant for them. But once you get enrolled onto the scheme, the payer will get double deduction, number one. And number two, the payer will save the 6% service tax. Okay, biotech industry, biotech, bionexus are also incentivized with pioneer status, which is an income exemption, 100% income exemption, or ITA, which is 100% of the qualifying capital expenditure. Education, healthcare sector is also well incentivized. You can see we are covering all the way from kindergarten to school to higher education. So and not forgetting also vocational, and of course in between we have the international schools, private education school, and very important another one is because a lot of them we have twinning programs, right? Twinning programs whereby a local university may have to make payments to a foreign university as a franchise operator. So for those franchise operator also we have a withholding tax exemption, so that it doesn't burden the Malaysian university that's making the payment. Okay, healthcare sector. So healthcare sector is also there are various incentives. Again, it goes back to capital expenditure, ITA, investment tax allowance, where we give 100% of qualifying capital expenditure. So and remember, all of these incentives are over and above your normal capital allowances. So when you see 100% there, what that essentially means is that when you spend 10 million, you already have a 10 million of capital allowance over a number of years. On top of that, you're going to have another 10 million of ITA, investment tax allowance, and so that means you spend 10 million, you get tax deduction for 20 million. And a tax deduction for 20 million means you save almost 5 million in taxes. Because our tax rate is 24%. So 24% multiplied by 20 million gives you to the tune of 48 million. Trading sector. Okay, trading, of course, is a conventionally low value adding activity because you're not manufacturing or producing anything, or you're not providing a service per se. But that being said, we also have some incentives for trading sector for certain export, as well as we have exemptions for offshore trading company. In case you choose not to use Labuan but to use onshore Malaysian company to do certain, you can go for offshore trading company exemption. But of course, we must understand that trading is conventionally not a high value adding activity, so incentives are limited. That is the case in most countries as well. Okay, high tech and multimedia sector. So this is where we have our MDEC administering the famous MSc status companies. Depending on whether you're located within a cyber city or designated premises or elsewhere. So cyber city is, for example, cyber city is Cyberjaya. Cyber city also includes places like TPM, Technology Park Malaysia in Bukit Jalil. So there are few cyber cities there, and there are also buildings which are not cyber cities but designated premises. So these are what we call as MSc status buildings. So here you can get 100% exemption for up to 10 years. For other locations, if you're not in an MSc status building, it doesn't mean you can't. You can still get, but it's 70% rather than 100%. And MSc status is not limited to tax exemption. It also gives you flexibility on immigration and bring in expatriates and whatnot as well. Of course, some may remember in 2019 and certain parts of 2018, MSc status was was put on hold, if I may say, because of OECD's comments on certain aspects of MSc status. Those issues have already been fixed, and now MDIC has continued to promote the MSc status program already. Okay, green tech sector, green technology. We also have again similar incentives based on qualifying expenditure. Service sector, we have for cold room.
Mr. Dinesh, there is a question from our attendees regarding RA and green ITA. Is it a mutually inclusive or exclusive? RA and green ITA.
Okay, yeah, I can see the question. Sorry,
the question is RA and green ITA is mutually inclusive or exclusive?
RA and
ITA, green ITA, green investment tax allowance.
Okay, you can't claim investment tax allowance and reinvestment allowance in the same year. You can't in the same year, but you can claim one after another.
Okay,
in the same year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any other question? Or we save it
so
to
far
the
you
end?
can proceed first. Yeah, you can proceed first, then I'll see the relevant questions.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, cold chain and room facilities are also incentivized. So banyak lah. So there are various sectors that are incentivized. Promotion of exports is covered. Venture capital company. Okay, this is very important. So if a venture capital company is investing in a company, that is an equity investment. But that equity investment, there is a tax deduction for equity investment on the investment amount. So this is to encourage venture capital companies to invest in Malaysian companies. Principal hub. This is our one of our topmost incentive lah. So this is for companies that are performing IPC or RDC or other principal hub function in Malaysia to control either global businesses and regional businesses. And over the years, this incentive has brought in many notable investments into Malaysia that from Fortune 500 companies and whatnot, that benefits not only the business or its employees, but also local supply chain, because conditions of this includes you must have local funding and you must purchase from local suppliers and whatnot. This benefits Malaysian companies as this global unicorns, if I may say, invest in Malaysia, start buying from Malaysian companies. When they buy, they also won't simply buy, they will do a vendor development program to uplift the standard and standardization of the of the Malaysian businesses that sells. Okay, financial services, we also have exemptions for Islamic banks and certain real estate investment trusts and whatnot. Okay, so those are sectoral incentives. We can see a wide range of sectors were covered there. I'll quickly go through the 2020 budget updates and try to leave behind more time for Prihatin and Penjana. E&E industry, electrical and electronical, actually is E&E sector, electrical and electronic sector of the manufacturing industry. We've given an ITA that's 50% of qualifying capital expenditure. This is This was initially given in lieu or as a replacement for reinvestment allowance. But these days, the Penjana initiative reinvestment allowance appear to be generally more attractive than this. I will come to the reinvestment allowance in Penjana in a bit, because this is only 50%, whereas that is 60%. Okay, tourism. For Visit Malaysia, we have incentive for investment in theme park as well as events and full entertainment duty exemption for certain locations that host events. So as I said, you will see that these days events are a bit difficult to host, but this was 2020 budget, which was announced in October 2019, right? So yeah. Okay, there's also exemptions for solar leasing, green technology. There are also deductions for employers. Okay, economic stimulus package. Of course, the stimulus packages are very, very big. You can't cover all of them in an hour or even a fraction of that. But we'll cover the tax incentive bits. But I think it's good to start with a snapshot of what are the various tax incentives we have had, right? So we have had a Prihatin initiative that was announced in March. Then to help SMEs further, Prihatin SME Plus was announced in April, a further 10 billion. And Penjana was announced in June, and Kita Prihatin was announced a few weeks ago in September. So what I'll be doing in the next few slides is to look at Penjana and Prihatin collectively and highlight the key tax incentives. So to attract foreign companies to invest in Malaysia, we're giving for manufacturing sector for investments 300 and 500 million, 0% tax rate for 10 years. So 0% tax rate is similar to Pioneer status 100% exemption. Or 0% for 15 years if they exceed 500 million in investment. And there is also ITA. ITA, as you can remember, is based on capex. It's not on income. It's based on capex. So the first two is based on income. The last one is based on capex. Okay. So 5 years for Malaysian company that relocate their manufacturing facility from other countries from outside Malaysia, say Thailand or wherever, any part of the world outside Malaysia. If you relocate into Malaysia, if the value is exceeding 300 million, you can get 100%. So of the value of the investment, of course, the value of the investment is excluding the value of land. It's only the building and machinery and equipment. We will give a further allowance of 100%. But what if, sometimes people ask, Dinesh, what if my investment is below 500 million, below 300 million? Does that mean that the government has nothing for me? The answer is no. The answer is no. If you're below 300 million, the government still has something. There's something for everyone. There's a special reinvestment allowance for manufacturing and selected agriculture sector. Even if you have finished your 15 years, you can still claim for YA 2020 and 2021. And reinvestment allowance means it is 60%. So not 100%, but 60%. So which means if you spend 10 million, you'll be getting, over time, you'll be getting an allowance of 16 million. Okay.
Mr. Dinesh, we are close to 10 a.m. That is 11. We are close to 11. One question from the attendees: is there an incentive for logistic sectors in specific?
Yes, there are incentives for logistics sector, especially if you're providing integrated logistics services. I didn't cover that in detail, but they can always write in an email to me, and I can show them the specifics, because 1 hour we want to cover all the sectors.
Yes, it's so many. And that is also the third question. Out of so many industries or economic sectors that you mentioned about the incentive, which one get the most?
Which one get the most? Okay, let me put it this way. Many countries, they have long-term focus on one, right? For example, Singapore usually doesn't focus on manufacturing and whatnot, right? Thailand focuses a lot on manufacturing. Malaysia, if you look at it historically, we were at one point of time an agriculture economy. And then we were an industrialized economy. So industrialized means manufacturing. Then we moved on to service sector, and today we are focusing on K services, which means knowledge-based services. And we are also slowly moving into AI and 4.0 or industry forward initiatives. And what we have been carefully doing over the years is that as we add on new feather to our hat, we have not forgone the previous sectors which were backbone to our economy. So we still, when we moved on to industrialization and had introduced a lot of incentive for manufacturing, we still retain our incentives for agriculture. Similarly, when we move on to services sector, doesn't mean we stop incentivizing manufacturing. No, when we incentivize manufacturing and technology and automation and all of this, we still retain our incentive for manufacturing. But of course, we get more careful with it because we want to make sure that it's liberalized to ensure that only manufacturing activities that benefit Malaysian workforce and Malaysian industries are incentivized. Because we don't want a scenario where we incentivize a certain low value adding activity which only benefits foreign workers, for example. So we have liberalized that, but I think we have a diverse focus on various sectors and subsectors, and we have to look at that in the context of our economic focus over the last 40 years. So the point is, when we had new focus, we have not abandoned the previous industries which were our backbone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Tanish. Okay, another question. Is there any new sector that the government should consider other than the sectors already covered in this tax incentive? Or what do you think about this?
I think the current direction of having pre-packaged incentives for key investments is a useful one, because that way then we get to invite investors and customize based on that. There are also a number of other industries which are not covered under the currently available list of incentives. But the question is, if we start writing laws and guidelines for every single possible industries, would that be worth the time, if I may say? It's always better to get the investor on the doorstep first and then customize the incentive to maximize.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, while I think the organizers said that we can extend another few minutes. So the question is whether there is incentive for floriculture, but I think by your notes, in terms of flowers and so on, it is not part of the incentive. Is that true? Floriculture, those who export flowers?
For reinvestment allowance, no. For reinvestment allowance, no. Other incentives, we could look into it. Of course, floral is generally a little bit more tougher than other aspects of agriculture, but I wouldn't rule it out. For reinvestment allowance, no, but for other category, we may qualify. For example, if you don't qualify under sectoral perspective, you can also see whether you can qualify from an activity-based perspective, such as automation and whatnot. Generally, floral is not at the top of the list, but I wouldn't rule it out altogether.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tanish.
Yeah, things like horticulture and whatnot are much more readily incentivized, but floriculture, I wouldn't rule it out altogether. We can look into the details to see whether there's possibilities.
Thank you very much. So since we have a few more minutes, so what I'll do for all the attendees, actually you can download the slides from the tax incentive slides under the handout. So just look into the right column, there is a handout. It is in a PDF file, so you can download that. So the title is Latest Slides Tax Incentive MPC 8 October. It's a PDF file, so you can download the slides by Mr. Dinesh. Last word from you, Mr. Dinesh. What would you like to advise us here? We are, some of them are entrepreneurs who would like to have the incentive to increase their productivity. What would be your advice?
Okay, before that, I can see two questions here that I can quickly comment on. One is that the 7-year time limit, does it apply or not for reinvestment allowance and for investment tax allowance, right? So this one, this was part of the 2020 budget proposal to impose a 7-year time limit on the to impose a 7-year time limit on the pioneer status. That was part of the 2020 budget proposal. But then after industry players met and explained to the government has already removed. So there is no 7-year time limit for investment tax allowance. So that was one of the questions. For pioneer losses are subject to 7-year time limit, but there's obviously no such thing as carry forward of the incentive itself. For the ITA, a 7-year time limit was proposed, but then subsequently was not implemented by the government because they lend years to the industry concern. So there is no 7-year time limit for the investment tax allowance. That's answer to one of the question, and the other question was asked as to whether we can while we are enjoying reinvestment allowance, the 15-year period, can I apply for other incentive? The answer is yes. During the 15-year period, if you want to go for other incentives such as pioneer status or ITA, by all means you can do that. That is not prohibited. That is allowed. Okay, so that's two questions that just popped up. I thought I'll quickly address those. In terms of closing remarks, I would say, of course, thank you, Dr. Ida, for moderating, and thanks MPC for organizing this. For the attendees, I would say that there's really so much of tax incentives available. It just requires careful planning in advance and getting in touch with the relevant authorities, let it be MIDA or MDEC or whichever. There are a number of authorities, Invest KL or Invest Penang, for example. There's so many of them to discuss the parameters and see where it fit into the current incentive, and if you don't, to see whether you can qualify under a pre-packaged incentive or whatnot. It's always good to have a professional thought in advance before you do something. It gets a lot difficult to go for this incentive if you've already done it and then you want to think about incentive. It gets very difficult. So timely consideration is important. Same thing for things like reinvestment allowance, which doesn't involve application, but you still need to document black and white the project, qualifying project and everything. So early professional thought will always give a lot of room to maximize these incentives that's available in order to boost the. See, all these incentives in the end are meant to allow Malaysian businesses to grow or to become more productive. That in a way, the end result is to benefit the economy as a whole, which includes the workforce as well as other businesses that are in the supply chain.
Thank you very much.
See opportunity in every crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Dinesh, for the advice to all of us. And okay, finally, I think we would like to thank again the organizer, which is Malaysia Productivity Corporation, and our esteemed speaker, Mr. Dinesh. Please, all of you, you may want to visit MPC website, www.mpc.gov.my, or you can join the social media of MPC on FB, Instagram, Twitter, and so on. Yeah. You also have the slides. Please don't forget to download the slides. Last, I think I would say, stay safe, everyone. Stay at home. Stay tuned to the next webinar series by end of the month. With that, thank you again, Mr. Dinesh. Hope to see you in person.
See you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.